Okay.
Hello, readers everywhere. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is my particular study in quarantine, and I am very, very proud to introduce my darling friend and one of my most favorite colleagues in the world, Janie Chang, who is fortunate enough to see the launch of her third book, The Library of Legends, which has already been selected as a Book of the Month Club book in April and is now available wherever books are sold. So Janie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Listen, thanks for helping me launch my latest novel, Kate. For those of you, actually, I'm not sure I know anyone who has not read The Alice Network or The Huntress, and Kate Quinn is the best-selling author of those two books, her most recent. And I have to tell you, I actually discovered Kate before those books because she's written other equally thrilling historical novels, one series set in ancient Rome and another one about the Borgias during Renaissance Italy. And it's great that she's here doing this video with me so that I'm not like the single person talking into the wilderness. Okay, so what should we start talking about?
Well, I think we really do first have to tell people how we got to be friends, because that is a really good story. I mean, it involves a travel jinx, like the travel jinx of all time. It involves book tour events. It involves our wonderful friend, Jennifer Robson, the best-selling author of The Gown and another Canadian superstar. And this all began under the guise when HarperCollins Canada, in their infinite wisdom, decided it would be a wonderful thing to send Janie and Jennifer Robson and myself all off on a couple of events together. A trio of cities, a trio of events, trio of novels. We'd all had books just come out, and they were probably realizing they'd bitten off more than they could chew when we suggested hashtagging the entire thing the hysterical fiction tour. I still remember the look of horror, basically, on our publicists' faces when they realized that these authors they thought were mature and responsible adults were all going to be hitting the road together on HarperCollins Canada's dime and having a blast. But we certainly did have a blast. We were completely professional during our events, you know, the occasional, like, you know, Wonder Woman triple pose aside. And this actually was, any other anecdotes from that you can remember? Because the travel jinx is the one that always sticks with me, but I know we had a lot happen on that tour.
I know, well, we first met up in Portland at the Historical Novel Society just to sort of get to know each other, because that was the first time I'd met you face to face, Kate. And of course, one of the things that helped the travel jinx along was I said to HarperCollins, you know, we're going to be in my home country, my hometown. Why not let me do the driving? So the first thing that happened when I went to pick up Jen and Kate was, you know, the air conditioner crapped out in the car. And this was, of course, June and very, very hot days. And they said, no, it's not a problem, not a problem. And for most part, it wasn't a problem until we got through the ferry crossing and onto the highway, and there was some semi had overturned. And the traffic was just sitting there for like an hour and a half, and we had no air conditioner, and people were doing all sorts of things to keep cool, including Kate. You had a wonderful view of.
Well, the guy in front of us, it was that kind of traffic jam where everybody's literally parked on the highway and getting out and walking out of their cars. Nothing is moving. The guy in front of us goes and sits on his bumper and to look over the top, and we have a splendid view of Plumber's Butt for the next hour and a half. It is, you know, I will spare you the pictures that are seared into my mind forever, but certainly I will never forget. But in any case, that was, the hysterical fiction tour really was a tremendous bonding experience, and certainly it's about the most fun that three authors can ever have, on the road or off. And this is also when Janie told us about the idea that would eventually become her novel, which is out now, The Library of Legends. And now we're in a hotel room. You have three authors in sweatpants at the end of a day, you know, very tired. I'm sure there was something from the minibar being consumed. And we're all talking about future projects. And Janie says, well, I don't know about this idea, but she says to Jennifer Robson and me, imagine a university which has had to, because of war, take to the road. And imagine a university professor slinging the daily lesson down his back so that his students who are walking behind him out of a war zone can look at the lesson and can learn it on their marching and can continue to discuss the ideas that the university is promulgating. And Jen and I literally like put down our drinks and are like, tell me more. Please tell me you're going to write this. Please tell me. And that is the book that became the Library of Legends. So I really feel like I did get to see the very seed that was the start of this book. And I think probably this is a good cue to talk about the book now. And so why not start with a quick summary? No spoilers for those who have not read it.
That's right. So the Library of Legends is set in 1937 when China and Japan are at war. And the main character, my main character, Leanne, must follow her university when they evacuate before they get bombed out. And the students and professors and staff begin their 1,000-mile walk to safety. They're carrying their belongings, their school supplies, even kitchenware, and they also carry with them the Library of Legends, a priceless ancient collection of Chinese myths. And as they travel, it turns out that the mythical creatures that are described in the Library of Legends are also on the move, and that a celestial being is traveling with the students. As for Leanne, she's finding friendships and possibly romance as the students bond on this terrible, hard trip. But her family's secrets make her a victim of political manipulation, and she finds she must distance herself from her new friends, especially after one of her classmates is murdered.
Now, I know this was not something that was in the, in your mind when you wrote the book, because how could it be? But, we're in these quarantine days, and we are in the days of, homeschooling like nothing before. And I couldn't help but think that this is a book, not just that I love, but it's a book for now. Because with all these parents who are having to learn about Zoom schooling and, online classrooms, it's like everybody is thinking about, the importance of education and, why it's important not to let it slide even in terrible times. And I'm also thinking it's a little bit of, a humorous reality check, because even the most stressed out mom can read this book and think, I had to struggle with that online Zoom classroom check-in process for 45 minutes, but I did not have to march for 8 hours in the pitch dark, flinging myself periodically into ditches to avoid overhead strafing Japanese planes and try to keep up with the lesson plan. So I really feel like this is the book that is totally speaking to the moment as far as education. But that's my history geek also that comes out of me, is making the connection from the past to the present. So if we're going to dive right into history geek mode, because that is completely what we are, tell me more about this campus of refugee students. I mean, is that based on real history?
And it was. I came across the memoirs of students from Zhejiang University, and it was all about how they saved this real set of ancient encyclopedias that were stored at the provincial library at the time in their city. And the head librarian of this library begged the chancellor of the university to take the books with him when they went on their evacuation. And the chancellor agreed because, they love education and knowledge and books. We all love books. And the head librarian said, but don't worry, I will find the money to pay for the transportation. But he couldn't. At that time, the government was just like stressed in 15 different ways. And the Ministry of Education thought that it was more important to get the students through safely instead of like a pile of old books. And the librarian actually ended up borrowing from friends and family, and eventually by the end of the war, selling his own house to pay for the transportation of these books. And it was not totally smooth. The crates traveled by train or boat whenever they could get them. And if not, then the students carried them in their backpacks, And there was a time that this crate of books overturned in a stream. And when the books were rescued, they were sopping wet. So they had to make a stop at the next town and spread them all out to dry in the courtyard of one of the temples. So it was 1,400 miles and 28 months of travel before they finally ended up in their permanent wartime campus. And it took so long because there were refugees on the road. They had to make way whenever troops came marching down the roads. They also stopped for weeks and sometimes months at different towns where they could settle down and carry on with their lessons, right? And at the end of this history of this really amazing history of these books, what happened was they were stored in caves in a remote area that, you know, the Japanese would never be interested in bombing. And 2 of the university servants stayed behind to guard and to care for the books. And the books came through the war relatively, amazingly unscathed. And actually, as kind of a coda to all of this, after the war, some Chinese scholars went to Japan in the 90s to look at some archives. And there they found mention in some archives in Kyoto that once Shanghai had fallen and was occupied by Japanese forces, I don't know what you would call it, the occupational committee for literary pursuits, meaning, you know, basically plunder and loot what you could of the cultural treasures, actually sent 9 agents to Hangzhou to look for this particular library. So, and take the books. So in retrospect, that chief librarian who sold his own home to ensure the safety of this library, he was not being alarmist, you know, he really had good cause. So it's really all down to the university students and staff and this librarian, their willingness to risk everything, including their own lives, to protect a cultural legacy. Because, you know, in my novel, there's only like 140 odd books that they need to carry. In real life, there were 280 cases of books that needed transporting, which really slowed down their progress. It really did put them in danger.
So much fascinating information here. How do you decide what to put in and what to leave out?
You're asking me this, and I know that you wrestle with the same problem.
Oh, we all wrestle with this problem.
It's so hard when you're a history geek, right? Because I think that, you know, well, the way I see it is that historical facts give you the framework and the boundaries, if you will, for your story. And there are the facts that sort of fit into the story and fit into the flow of the story. And there's others that sort of divert it into left field. And those end up falling into the murder your darlings category, which happens during editing and which, you know, drive us to drink. And those, but if those are the pieces that I included, then it would completely, it would just completely disrupt the story. For example, if I'd started with the story of the 9 Japanese agents heading into Hangzhou to steal the library, it would have been a completely different story, right? So you really can't stuff a book so full of facts that there's no room left for the fiction. Okay, since you put me on the spot, I need to ask you, was there anything that just killed you having to cut out? And this could be like, you know, for past books or a current one.
Well, I do have one I'm wrestling with right now, which is, you know, my upcoming book, the next one out, which will be March 2021, is titled The Rose Code, and that is about the female code breakers of Bletchley Park during World War II. And my fictionalized and some real women all get to know each other as they work at the park from all walks of life. And one thing they have in common is that they start a literary society. Again, the love for books being something during war that is a real common uniting factor. And, you know, they love their novels, and that's how they get a little bit of escapism into their very hard, long work shifts. And, you know, they read Agatha Christie, who was one of the most popular, you know, writers of the day, who was putting out a book every year. That woman was prolific. And the thing is that I found out is that Agatha Christie crossed paths with one of the top Bletchley Park code breakers. And that is because there was a whole incident where MI5 literally got worried that she knew something more than she should have known about Bletchley Park because she had a character named Major Bletchley who was a spy in one of her books. And so they dispatched an old friend of hers who happened to be a part code breaker to have lunch with her and probe to see where she got that information. And I don't have room in this book to put this in there. And this is a book about code breaking girls who also love mystery novels and get involved, with spies and all sorts of things. And I don't have room for the Agatha Christie cameo. And I'm trying to figure out what I can do with this. Maybe it'll just be a short story, like a promotional extra. Maybe it'll be, just something that hits the floor of the cutting room, and it's the murder your darlings thing. But, the pain is real, when you find stuff that is so fascinating, but it's like, it doesn't serve the book and it's got to go.
Oh, that's definitely, you need to have several stiff drinks after murdering that one.
Yeah, I really do. So is there any bit more you can tell me about this encyclopedia that was saved? I mean, what made it so special apart from being an antique? Because if you're carrying hundreds of cases of books and you're putting your students' life in danger, why is this set at this library worth it?
We're warning everybody, we are going into real history geek rabbit hole territory now. So actually, I think of that encyclopedia as a vanity project because the man who commissioned it was the Qianlong Emperor of the Qing Dynasty during the 18th century. Now, the Qing Dynasty was Manchu, and the Ming emperors they conquered had been Chinese, Han Chinese. So this emperor wanted to prove that his dynasty was as knowledgeable and cultured as the previous one. And the greatest of the Ming emperors back in 1407 had compiled a huge encyclopedia of 370 million words. And the Qianlong emperor wanted one that was bigger, like my encyclopedia is bigger than yours.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Now, the Imperial Library already owned like this vast collection of literature, but the emperor asked his subjects to make contributions from their private collections. Now, due to his track record of literary inquisitions, where books that were thought to have anti-Manchu sentiments were burned and their owners executed, the Chinese were understandably reluctant to comply. And he didn't get any book donations. So the emperor issued another decree to say that the books would be returned, and once the project was over, and their owners would be immune from punishment, even if their books contained anti-Manchu sentiments. So out of that, he got about 10,000 books donated. It was probably the most ambitious work of editorial curation in history. The result was a set of encyclopedias called the 四库全书, an encyclopedia that referenced all classical Chinese literature going back to the Han Dynasty, which goes back to 200 BC. It took 630 scholars, 11 years to compile, and when it was finished, it contained 800 million words, making it the largest encyclopedia in the world. And it would be another 225 years before another collection of knowledge surpassed this word count, and that was English Wikipedia in 2007 as it approached 1 billion words. But you can see where it would be so valuable to serious scholars because they could use it to reference and cross-reference information and use it to hunt down missing books. Oh, and the emperor had about 3,000 offending books burned and their owners executed.
Oh, so much for that promise.
And then there were 7 copies made, like hand transcribed. Can you imagine that? 800 million words times 7 hand transcribes. 3 were lost over the years to war and fire, and the others were more or less intact, but the one in the city of Hangzhou was the most complete. And during previous conflicts, before we decided to call a war, the Japanese had made various incursions into various cities in China, and for the ones that contained copies of this encyclopedia, they had tried to steal them. But fortunately, all of them had been moved and hidden away beforehand. That was very geeky, right? You didn't really need to know all that.
No, it's all right. This is where we can finally have a chance to geek out about the research. Now, I couldn't help but think when I was reading about the students in your book is what they endured to keep up with their education. And yet they also still, are believably students that we would recognize today. They still manage to kid around. They go sightseeing. They fall in love. They publish a newspaper, for God's sake, while they're on the road, escaping a war zone. Talk a little bit more about that.
For that, I kind of borrowed from stories my father told me, where he said, well, we were young, sort of young and stupid, but mostly young and full of youthful optimism. I mean, my father wasn't even 20 years old when his university evacuated, right? And at that age, you think you're going to live forever, right? And they fell in love. Like maybe the girls outnumbered, the boys outnumbered the girls like 5-1. And, I read memoirs of every single female student having at least 3 or 4 admirers, and those female students sort of bemoaning the fact that why did they write such terrible love poetry and to give to them.
That actually reminds me a bit of the Bletchley Park ladies too. I mean, there was a great phrase I ran across, because at least at the beginning the women really outnumbered the men. And so one of the ladies said, they were asked, what are the odds that you can find a husband here? And she quipped, the odds are good, but the goods were odd. And that's because, of course, many of the code breakers were a little bit weird. This is definitely a campus of oddballs, as it was, so the odds were good, but the goods were odd. So how did the parents of these kids, who were taking to the road, allow that? I mean, was the fact that their children were just literally taking to the road on a mobile university in a war zone?
It's even worse than that, Kate, because I didn't bring it up in the book because, again, another huge diversion, but it wasn't just college students that were trekking their way across China. There were also middle schools and high schools. I mean, teachers were shepherding 14-year-olds across a war zone. I mean, I've read the memoirs, and the reason that parents allowed it was they were cut off from their families during the war. And the reason that there were so many younger students, stuck with their schools was because the best schools were in the big cities. So my father, for example, left his hometown, this little rural town, when he was 14 to go to a really good boarding school in one of the big cities. And then with the war, they got cut off from their families, so the schools had no choice. They had a duty of care to those kids. The enemy was on the way. The government was doing the best they could to get them transportation away from the advancing troops. And also in Chinese culture, your teachers have total authority. When you're at school, they are like your surrogate parents, and you treat them with Confucian respect. You did not disobey your teachers, for fear of shaming your families. So, your parents were deferential to your teachers. There was no such thing as the PTA meetings of today where, parents stood up and sort of voiced their complaints. It was more like, what more can we do to make your child, anyway. So even the youngest of students were very cooperative with this sort of a cultural background.
Yeah, you probably didn't need an infusion of, helicopter parenting, making your poor kids and characters' lives more complicated at this point. Well, something else I wanted to bring up, to be sure, is that, because one of the things I love about your books is that there's always a touch of the mystical in there. Now, it was in your first book, 3 Souls, that was a young woman examining her life after her own death. And we see that her own soul has various incarnations and aspects that help her look at her life from different angles. And I remember you saying that in Chinese lore, there can be many souls inside one body, even more than 3. Mm-hmm. And now in Dragon Springs Road, your young heroine makes friends with a fox spirit, which is another very familiar tale in Chinese lore. So what is your element of the divine or the mystical in Libraries of Legends?
In the Library of Legends, I make use of a very popular Chinese folktale about a star called the Weaving Maid, who comes down from the heavens, and she meets this handsome young ox herd, they fall in love, and but she has to go back up to the heavens. And this is, this is very, very popular, and it's become a holiday, and it's been rebranded, marketed as Chinese Valentine's Day. So I borrowed from that story to create the fictional legend of the Willow Star and her prince. So the provenance is, I come by it honestly. But also, with the Library of Legends crossing China on this evacuation with the students, it also made me think that there was a whole way of life, a whole belief system that was going to pass away by the time this war was over. And I was thinking, what about the creatures of legend that are documented in these books, the Library of Legends? So I made it also a parallel evacuation with the spirit guardians and the magical creatures of China also leaving the country, going back to the land of immortals. Because, when you have that library, it's so symbolic, it can carry so much metaphor with it. And, it just seemed to lend itself so well to creatures like, there's a Chinese unicorn, there are, the river gods, there are the horse gods. There is the god of prostitutes, who obviously lives in Shanghai, which was the sin bin of China at the time. So many of those pass through the novel.
And so who was your favorite character in this book to write? Because I know we all have favorites, and they're not like when you have actual children, when saying favorites will scar them for life.
Well, I have a major character who's my favorite, and also a minor character who's my favorite. And I'll start with the minor character, who is a young student who actually is, he's a terrible student, gets expelled, runs away, runs away to the front, where he has an uncle who's a general, and the uncle sort of puts him to work and turns him into a field surgeon because he's actually literate. This at a time when 95% of Chinese are illiterate. Hands him a field manual for surgeons and says, okay, you can be a doctor now. And the reason—
no pressure.
And the reason this is he's my favorite minor character is because this is actually based on a friend of the family who was a troublemaker, who did get expelled from school, who did run away to the front because he couldn't face his mother for being expelled. And he was handed a field surgeon's manual, and that's how he spent the war. This 19-year-old performing surgeries and helping doctors, My favorite major character, I think, would have to be, believe it or not, I really waver, but I like the character Shell, who is the love interest for my main character, Leanne, because he is not aware of who he is, and he is also very representative of the elite Chinese family in those days. Before going on this trek, he had never seen poverty in the rural towns of China. He just, he lived a very sheltered and comfortable life. And this evacuation of Chinese universities was a real eye-opener for so many young people of that generation, because they were like Shell. You could only attend these universities if your parents could pay the tuition. And so your parents had to be wealthy,
Well, it's almost when you have characters with the biggest opportunity to change, which is when you have the most fun writing them. And I think reading them too, because when you have someone who starts from a privileged position and then they get their eyes opened, forcibly sometimes, that's a wonderful journey to go on. And really, that's the whole thing that I love with Library of Legends, is that yes, there's this external journey where they're marching over 1,000 miles, but there is also the internal journey where people are coming even further in some ways in their realizations about who they are and the world around them. What is that? So that is one thing. That's one thing. If you didn't guess, I love this book, and I could talk about it all day. But we know that people are probably going to need to be getting dinner and tending pets and so forth. So I will say now, you I think have something to show us, and I'm really hoping you will hold up that puzzle so I can talk about it.
Yes.
All right, if you're looking at that, that is a 1,000-piece puzzle, people, a big one measuring almost 19 inches by 27, based on the gorgeous artwork from the cover of the Library of Legends. It's a very, very, very limited edition. Hours of fun or frustration. Now, Janie, how can viewers enter to win this?
I am going to make it super easy. First of all, it's for US residents only because a couple of weeks ago we did the Canadian launch. Okay, so just comment below the post and tell me which town and which state you're from. Dead easy. Or ask a question because I will hang around for the next hour or so to answer any questions that come up. But the contest closes today at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. The contest for the puzzle closes, and I will pick a winner later and I will post on Facebook and tag them. Yeah, but you will know today.
And that's not all, right?
That's right. And then for the next 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I will pick a winner each day for a book giveaway. So I'll be giving away 3 copies of the Library of Legends. But because we have such a wonderful publisher, Kate is also running a giveaway this week.
Yes, that is right. I will be posting on Friday 5 copies of the Library of Legends going out to 5 lucky readers. So keep an eye on my author page and be sure to enter. And even if you are not going to end up being one of our winners, I do hope you will consider grabbing this book. Go to IndieBound, to support your local indie store. Go to Book Depository, which ships free worldwide. Janie, do you have a shout out for a local favorite bookstore, either in Canada or in the US, who could use the support?
Yes. If you love local independent bookstores, now like never is the time to do a little shopping there. So on that note of doing good, I think we can end. And thank you everyone so much for being here today. Enter below, win something, and thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Have fun in quarantine. Pick up your book. Stay reading. Stay healthy. Stay safe.